Try something for a moment. Think about everything that proves you exist. Your driver's license, your passport, your Medicare card, the photos sitting in your phone, messages you've sent this morning, the receipt from your last coffee. Maybe you've got some supermarket loyalty card tucked away in your wallet. Without even trying, you've probably left hundreds of little traces of yourself today. Now imagine removing every one of them, not hiding them, not throwing them away, erasing them so completely that if something happened tomorrow, investigators couldn't even tell police your name. It sounds impossible, but in the spring of 1995, someone came remarkably close. For nearly 30 years, she's been known by the name that almost certainly isn't hers, Jennifer Fairgate, or perhaps Jennifer Fairgate. Even that much isn't certain. She arrived in Oslo carrying luggage, wearing expensive clothes, speaking fluent English, and behaving like any other international traveller. 3 days later, she was dead. And almost everything she left behind raised another question. Who removes every label from their clothes? Why check in to a luxury hotel without a valid credit card? Why carry a pistol with its serial number deliberately erased? And perhaps the question that has haunted detectives the longest: how does someone die in the middle of a busy European capital without a single person reporting them missing? Over the years, theories have ranged from the ordinary to the extraordinary. Some believe she simply wanted to disappear. Others think she was running from something. And then there are those who are convinced she was involved in espionage during one of Europe's most uncertain periods. The truth is, no one knows. But before we go into the theories, we need to understand what exactly happened inside room 2805. Because the facts alone are strange enough. It is easy to forget what Europe looked like in 1995. The Berlin Wall had fallen only a few years earlier. Germany was still adjusting to reunification. The war in Bosnia was continuing less than 2,000 kilometers away. Across Europe, governments were redrawing borders. Intelligence agencies were adapting to a post-Cold War world, and organised crime networks were taking advantage of political instability in Eastern Europe. Norway, by comparison, felt calm, safe. Oslo wasn't the sort of city that usually made international headlines for violent crime, which is exactly why this case stood out. Standing above the city skyline was the Oslo Plaza Hotel. Today it is known as the Radisson Blu Plaza, but in 1995, it was one of the tallest buildings in Norway. It was where airline crews stayed, business executives, government officials, foreign visitors. If you wanted luxury, privacy, and normality among hundreds of guests, it was the perfect place. No one expected someone to disappear there. At around 10:45 that evening, a young woman walked through the lobby. Nobody remembers exactly what she was wearing. Nobody remembers whether she looked nervous. In fact, one of the most frustrating things about this case is how ordinary she appeared. She didn't argue with reception. She didn't seem rushed. She wasn't trying to avoid attention. If anything, she blended in. And perhaps that was exactly what she intended. She approached the front desk and asked for a room. The receptionist handed her a registration card. She wrote down the name Jennifer Fairgate, or perhaps Fairgate. The handwriting has been debated ever since. She claimed she was from Belgium. She listed an address in the small Belgian village of Verlen. She even supplied a telephone number. Nothing immediately raised suspicion. Hotels process hundreds of check-ins every week. Reception staff aren't detectives. Their job is to welcome guests, not investigate them. Room 2805 was assigned. A room high above the streets of Oslo, quiet, private, with sweeping views across the city. It would be the last place she was ever seen alive. There was another name on the registration card, Lois Fairgate. No first initial, no passport number, no signature, no verified record that this person even existed. Police would later spend years trying to determine whether Lois Fairgate had checked into the hotel, met Jennifer, or was simply another invented identity. To this day, no one knows. The registration card itself looked perfectly routine, until detectives began checking the information after her death. The address? It didn't exist. The village was real, the street wasn't. The telephone number? Also false. It wasn't connected to anyone. It wasn't even an allocated number. One by one, the details she provided began to collapse, and detectives realized something unsettling. The woman in room 2805 hadn't made a simple mistake. She appeared to have created an identity from scratch. If this was an ordinary investigation, this is the point where detectives would begin building a time frame. Who did she meet? Where did she go? Who she saw? Those questions usually form the backbone of a homicide investigation. But in this case, the timeline was full of holes. It's less like a straight line and more like a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. The woman calling herself Jennifer Fairgate checked into room 2805 on the evening of the 31st of May, 1995. She was booked to stay for several nights. But unlike most hotel guests, she left behind very little evidence of how she spent her time. She didn't entertain visitors in any way staff could confirm. She didn't make a fuss. She didn't become memorable. One hotel employee would later describe her as polite but reserved. Another remembered she seemed self-assured, comfortable enough to travel alone, but beyond that, recollections quickly became vague. That's understandable. Large hotels see hundreds of guests every week. Most disappear from memory almost as soon as they've checked out. Jennifer never checked out. The more detectives reconstructed those 3 days, the stranger they became. Normally a hotel stay creates a paper trail. Guests use the restaurant. They order drinks. They make phone calls, ask for directions, buy souvenirs. They leave receipts in their pockets. Even if they're traveling alone, they usually leave dozens of tiny clues behind. Jennifer didn't. She appears to have spent surprisingly little time interacting with staff, and when she did, those conversations were brief. Housekeeping reported that she often declined service. Her room remained unusually tidy, spotless, just controlled. Nothing appeared casually discarded. No shopping bags, no postcards, no brochures advertising Oslo's attractions, no maps folded across the front of a desk. There was little to suggest she'd done any sightseeing. If she travelled for business, there was no briefcase filled with paperwork, no diary of appointments, no business cards waiting to be exchanged. It was almost as though she arrived with one purpose, and whatever that purpose was, it didn't involve exploring the city. One aspect of the case that has fueled speculation for decades. There are significant gaps in Jennifer's movements while she was staying at the Plaza Hotel. Electronic keycard records suggest there were extended periods where she wasn't inside room 2805. Exactly how long those absences lasted and what they mean has been interpreted differently over the years, and not every published account agrees on the details. That's important. You'll hear people online confidently claim she disappeared for exactly 24 hours or that investigators know precisely where she went. They don't. The records can simply tell us that there are stretches of time that remain difficult to reconstruct with certainty. Where was she? Walking around Oslo? Meeting someone? Travelling outside the city? Or simply using another entrance and avoiding notice? The honest answer is, we don't know. It's one of the many unanswered questions that has allowed speculation to flourish. Something else began to stand out. Jennifer hadn't provided a valid method of payment. That might sound like a small administrative detail, but in a luxury hotel, it mattered. As her stay continued, reminders about the outstanding account began appearing through the hotel's internal television messaging system, a standard practice at the time. From the hotel's perspective, it wasn't a crisis. Guests sometimes forgot to settle accounts or update their payment details. But eventually staff needed to speak with her. Those routine payment reminders would unintentionally become one of the last documented interactions anyone had with the woman in room 2805. As detectives interviewed hotel employees, they searched for anything that might reveal who Jennifer really was. Even small observations mattered. Did she seem frightened? Was she looking over her shoulder? Did she ask any unusual questions? Did anyone go to her room? The answers were frustratingly ordinary. No one reported any obvious argument. No one described frantic behaviour. No one recalled seeing her carrying large bags in or out of the hotel after she checked in. Some witnesses believe there may have been a man near room 2805 during her stay. Others couldn't remember. Years later, separating memory from assumption becomes almost impossible. Police investigated every lead they could, but none developed into confirmed evidence that another person had been inside the room before her death. That distinction matters. Rumours have grown around the case over the years, especially online. Some are based on genuine witness statements. Others have been repeated so often they've taken on a life of their own. One of the challenges in researching the Oslo Plaza mystery is separating what investigators actually documented from what later become internet folklore. The longer you spend with this case, the more one thought keeps creeping in. Was Jennifer simply an unremarkable guest, or was she trying very hard to appear like one? There's a difference. People involved in covert work, whether intelligence, organised crime, or even fraud, often succeed not because they attract attention, but because they don't. That doesn't mean Jennifer was a spy. There's no verified evidence she worked for any intelligence service. No declassified files, no former colleagues coming forward, no official confirmation from any government. Investigators couldn't ignore one uncomfortable reality. Almost everything they eventually learned about her pointed towards preparation. The false identity, the invented address, the disconnected phone number. Individually, each detail could perhaps be explained away. Together, they suggested planning. Whether that planning was for a new life or for a final act remains one of the central questions of the case. Saturday morning came and went without incident. Guests checked out, new guests arrived. Conference rooms filled. The Plaza Hotel carried on as it always had. By the afternoon, staff became increasingly concerned the account for room 2805 still hadn't been settled. Again, it wasn't unusual, but someone needed to speak to the guest. A security guard was asked to visit the room. It's impossible to know what he expected when he stepped into the lift and made his way towards the 28th floor. Probably nothing more dramatic than reminding the guest to visit reception. He knocked, no answer. He waited, then knocked again. Still nothing. He called out, silence. Then everything changed. The sound echoed through the hallway, not muffled, not distant. A single unmistakable shot from inside room 2805. The guard froze. For a split second, there was only silence. Then instinct took over. Instead of forcing his way into the room alone, he retreated to alert other staff. It was a decision that would later be questioned by some observers. But standing alone in a hotel corridor, with a gunshot having just rung out from behind a locked door, it's difficult to say how many of us would have reacted. Within minutes, staff returned. They opened the door and stepped into one of the most enduring mysteries in modern European criminal history. For a moment, picture the scene: a quiet corridor on the 28th floor, a luxury hotel carrying on with its Saturday afternoon routine. Guests chatting over late lunches, suitcases rolling through the lobby, housekeepers pushing linen carts from room to room. Life continues as normal, and behind one locked door, a young woman was dead. When hotel staff finally entered room 2805, they weren't stepping into what looked like a violent struggle. Nothing had been smashed. Furniture hadn't been overturned. Curtains still hung neatly over the windows overlooking Oslo. The room was almost unnervingly tidy. It was the kind of chaos detectives often associate with murder. But experienced investigators know something important. Crime scenes don't always tell you what happened. They tell you what someone wanted you to believe happened. The woman was laying on the bed. She had been shot once. The woman was laying on the bed. She had been shot once. The wound was catastrophic. A Browning high-power pistol rested nearby. If this had been an ordinary suicide, detectives might have expected the investigation to become a matter of identifying the deceased, notifying the family and confirming the circumstances. Instead, almost immediately, the questions began. Who was she? Where had the gun come from? Why was there no identification anywhere in the room? And perhaps most importantly, why did almost every object investigators examined seem designed to reveal as little as possible? The firearm itself demanded attention. It wasn't a small pocket pistol, nor was it an expensive handgun that someone might buy on impulse. It was a Browning high power. Designed by the legendary American firearms designer John Browning and completed after his death, the high power became one of the most successful military pistols ever made. For decades, it was issued to armed forces and police agencies around the world. NATO countries used it. Military units carried it. Law enforcement officers trusted it. It earned a reputation for reliability and accuracy, which raises an obvious question. Why would a young woman traveling under a false identity be carrying one? It doesn't mean she had military training. Thousands of surplus high-power pistols eventually entered civilian markets across Europe. Collectors owned them. Sport shooters used them. Criminals acquired them too. The pistol by itself doesn't prove anything. But there was something about this one that immediately caught investigators' attention. The serial number had been deliberately removed. Not scratched accidentally, not worn with age. Someone had taken time to erase it. Removing the serial number isn't impossible. It can be done using abrasives, machinery, or chemicals. The purpose is almost always the same: to make tracing the weapon far more difficult. Police around the world encounter defaced firearms in criminal investigations. It's far less common in cases that appear, at least initially, to involve suicide. Could Jennifer have removed it herself? Certainly. Could someone else have done it long before she ever held the weapon? That's equally possible. The gun simply adds another layer of uncertainty. Inside the room, detectives also discovered 25 loose rounds of 9mm ammunition. Not a full box, loose cartridges. Again, not impossible to explain. Some firearm owners carry spare ammunition. Some don't. But investigators noted it because it didn't fit neatly into the picture they were trying to build. If someone intended to end their own life, why bring dozens of extra rounds? Perhaps there's a perfectly ordinary explanation. Perhaps there wasn't. The evidence couldn't answer that question. Almost from the beginning, one aspect of the investigation divided opinion. Not among conspiracy theorists, among forensic observers. Norwegian police concluded that Jennifer had taken her own life. That remains the official finding today. It is important to say that clearly. There has never been any official ruling of homicide. But that hasn't stopped forensic specialists and independent researchers from asking difficult questions about the physical evidence. One of those questions concerns gunshot residue. When someone fires a handgun, tiny particles produced by the explosion inside the weapon can settle on the shooter's hands and clothing. The amount varies enormously. Whether hand position, movement after the shot, and countless other factors can affect what's found later. So the absence of significant residue doesn't automatically prove someone didn't fire a weapon. That's a common misconception. However, some researchers have pointed out that the reported findings in this case seem unusual when viewed alongside the rest of the evidence. At the time, the room contained extensive blood splatter resulting from the devastating head wound. Photographs taken by investigators showed blood on parts of the walls and ceiling. Again, that's not unusual in a close-range gunshot. However, critics of the official conclusion have questioned whether the position of the pistol, the blood evidence, and the reported residue findings fit together as neatly as they first appeared. Others disagree. They argue that the unusual doesn't mean impossible, and that's an important distinction. In forensic science, unusual events happen more often than people realize. The role of investigators isn't to find the nearest explanation. It's to find the explanation best supported by the evidence. Decades later, reasonable people still disagree about what that evidence ultimately shows. There was something else detectives couldn't ignore. A hotel room usually reflects a person staying in it. You see evidence of daily life. A jacket thrown across a chair, a newspaper folded on the bedside table, a suitcase with clothes spilling over the edge, half-finished cups of coffee, receipts, shopping bags. Room 2805 didn't feel like that. It felt controlled. Almost every item seemed to have been placed with purpose. Nothing appeared casually discarded. Nothing suggested someone had settled in. It was as though Jennifer had been living out of a carefully packed suitcase without ever truly occupying the room. That impression would only grow stronger once detectives began examining her belongings. Investigators probably expected the suitcase to answer their biggest question. Who was this woman? Instead, it became another mystery. There were clothes, toiletries, personal belongings, enough to suggest she had planned to travel, but almost nothing connected those belongings to an identifiable person. No passport, no driver's license, no wallet, no family photographs tucked inside a pocket, no holiday souvenirs, no airline baggage tags of her real name, nothing. Without meaning to, most of us leave behind a trail. Jennifer didn't. Or perhaps someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure she wouldn't. The suitcase had given investigators almost nothing. No name, no history, no explanation. But there is one thing it did reveal. Someone had gone to unusual lengths to erase the identity of the woman who had been staying in room 2805. Because the more detectives examined Jennifer's belongings, the more they realized something was missing. Not hidden, not misplaced, removed. the missing labels. Inside the suitcase were clothing items, shirts, jackets, underwear, shoes, everyday things that suggested a woman was planning for a trip. But investigators noticed something strange. The labels had been cut out. Not one, almost all of them. The small piece of fabric that normally reveals where clothing was manufactured, what size it was, and where something was even purchased, was gone. For most travelers, clothing labels are meaningless. They are itchy tags that are sometimes removed because they annoy us. But to investigators, they can be valuable evidence. A label can provide a country of origin, a brand, manufacturing location, a timeline. Sometimes even a link to a store or a buyer. In Jennifer's case, those clues had disappeared. The question was obvious. Why? There are ordinary explanations. Some people remove every label from their clothing. Some travelers dislike tags. Some people simply have a habit of cutting them out. But investigators were not looking at one missing label. They were looking at a pattern. A suitcase containing almost no identifying information, belonging to a woman who had already checked into a hotel under a false name. A woman whose passport and personal documents were missing. And now, a wardrobe stripped of clues. Individually, each detail could be explained. Together, they created a much stranger picture. Modern investigators often talk about a person's digital footprint, a record of their existence. Emails, phone records, purchases. Even before the internet age, people still left traces behind. Letters, membership cards, library books, a name written inside a notebook. Jennifer Fairgate appeared to have almost none of those things, leaving behind only what was absolutely necessary. And that raised a disturbing possibility. Was Jennifer naturally private, or was she someone deliberately trying to hide her identity? The clothing mystery. Among the details that have continued to attract attention is the question of Jennifer's clothing. Some items appear to be ordinary travel clothes, but investigators noted that the circumstances inside the room were unusual. There was no clear explanation for why certain personal items were absent. No obvious signs of a normal overnight stay. No complete picture of how she spent her time in the hotel. The absence of certain belongings has led to decades of speculation, but speculation must be separated from evidence. The investigation never proved that another person removed those items. It never proved Jennifer was murdered. It never proved the missing belongings were evidence of foul play. These were simply more unanswered questions in a case that was already full of them. Perhaps one of the most unusual discoveries came from the identity documents Jennifer used when checking into the hotel. The name she gave staff was Jennifer Fairgate, but investigators quickly discovered that that name did not appear to belong to a real person. The address she provided was false, the telephone number was not connected to her, and the identification she presented raised more questions than answers. Then came another problem. Jennifer's fingerprints were not found on many of the objects investigators expected. Her belongings, the room, items that might normally contain evidence of a person's daily routine. Again, this detail has been debated. Fingerprint evidence is complicated. A lack of fingerprints does not automatically mean someone never touched an object. Surfaces vary. Fingerprints disappear. Cleaning, time, moisture, and handling all affect what remains. But in a case where investigators were already struggling to establish who this woman was, every missing piece mattered. When police investigate an unidentified person, one of the first tasks is surprisingly simple. Try to build a life. A name, a family, a childhood, a workplace. A place where someone noticed they were gone. They ask, who loved this person? Who knew them? Who was expecting them home? Who was the last person to speak to them? But with Jennifer, there was no beginning, only an ending. Investigators had a body, they had a hotel room, they had a suitcase, a gun, but they didn't have a person. They searched for missing person reports. They compared details with known disappearances. They looked for connections that might identify her. But no family member came forward. No friend called police. No employer reported an absent worker. No one appeared to be searching for Jennifer Fairgate. And that may be the most haunting detail of the entire case. Because when someone disappears, the world usually reacts. Someone notices an empty chair. Someone wonders why a phone call wasn't returned. Someone waits for them to walk through the door. But days passed and no one came looking. The investigation had turned back to the hotel. The woman had arrived at one of Oslo's most prestigious hotels. She had booked room 2805. She provided a name. She had paid a deposit. She had interacted with staff. For a brief moment, she had existed. But even here, the records raised questions. The booking information did not lead detectives to her real identity. The details appeared incomplete, and the name Jennifer Fairgate became what it would remain for decades, a name attached to mystery, not a person. Investigators now face one of the hardest tasks in forensic work, identifying someone who had carefully hidden themselves. They examined photographs, reviewed witness statements, they compared information internationally. They tried to determine where had she come from, why had she travelled to Oslo, who was she intending to meet, and was anybody reporting her missing? Every question led to another. But then a small discovery offered the first real glimpse into Jennifer's possible background. Something inside the room suggested she may not have been completely unknown. Something that connected her to the wider world. Something that hinted at where she may have travelled from, and perhaps even who she had been before she entered room 2805. Because Jennifer Fairgate may have disappeared from the world, but she had left behind one final clue. Because Jennifer Fairgate may have disappeared from the world, but she left behind one final clue. A clue hidden in a few possessions she carried. A clue detectives would spend years trying to understand. For investigators, the hardest cases are not always the ones with too little evidence. Sometimes they are the ones with just enough evidence to prove that something happened, but not enough to explain why. A woman had arrived at one of Oslo's most luxurious hotels. She had checked in, she had used a false identity, and had spent several days inside the room. And then she was gone, leaving behind a mystery that would survive for decades. Once investigators accepted that Jennifer Fairgate was not her real name, the search changed. They were no longer investigating the death of a known person. They were trying to identify someone who had effectively erased herself. Police examined possible links across Europe. They looked into missing person databases. They considered whether she could have been connected to criminal activity, intelligence work, or simply a private individual travelling under a false name. But every possible path seemed to disappear. No confirmed family, no confirmed workplace, no confirmed home, no confirmed past. The woman in 2805 remained a blank page. One of the strongest investigative links involved Belgium. The document Jennifer used when checking into the hotel appeared to suggest a connection to the country. The address she provided was Belgium. The details were later found to be unreliable. But Belgium became an important part of the investigation because authorities believed the woman may have spent time there before travelling to Norway. Some researchers have suggested that she may have become connected to Belgium through travel, work, or personal relationships. However, nothing has been conclusively proven, and this is one of the challenges of the case. A possibility can become a theory very quickly, but a theory is not evidence. Perhaps no theory has attracted more attention than the possibility that Jennifer was involved in espionage. The reasons are easy to understand: a false identity, a hotel room in a major European city, a firearm with a removed serial number, missing labels, few personal belongings, a carefully constructed absence of information. These details resemble elements found in stories about intelligence operations. But resemblance is not proof. There is no confirmed evidence that Jennifer was a spy. No government has acknowledged any involvement. No intelligence agency has been linked to the case. The theory exists because some details appear unusual, not because investigators discovered a hidden operation. The official conclusion remains that Jennifer Fairgate died by suicide. Norwegian authorities found no evidence that another person was responsible for her death, and there are aspects of the scene that support that conclusion. The weapon was found in the room. The door was locked. There was no confirmed evidence of another person being present. A person can sometimes take extreme steps to conceal their identity before ending their life. Some people disappear from their old lives. Some use aliases. Some leave behind no explanation. It is uncomfortable, but it happens. Yet questions remain. Why the false identity? Why remove the clothing labels? Why remove the gun serial number? Why was there so little personal history? And why did nobody report her missing? These questions do not prove homicide, but they explain why the case continues to fascinate investigators and the public. Those who believe that Jennifer may have been murdered point to the unusual circumstances. A stranger using a false name, a weapon altered to prevent identification, a room containing almost no personal trace, a death surrounded by unanswered questions. They argue that someone else may have been involved, perhaps someone who knew her, perhaps someone who wanted her identity hidden, perhaps someone who staged the scene. But again, there is no confirmed evidence proving this. No suspect, no motive, no witness. No forensic conclusion establishing murder. The possibility exists, but the evidence has never taken investigators there. Years later, advances in forensic technology offered few possibilities. DNA analysis, improved databases, international information sharing, methods that investigators in 1995 never could have imagined. In recent years, renewed interest in unidentified person cases has brought fresh attention to Room 2805. Researchers have looked at old photographs, investigated old records, examined possible ancestry clues, and attempted to use modern science to answer a question that has remained unanswered for nearly 3 decades. Who was she? But even modern technology has limits. DNA can reveal ancestry. It can sometimes identify relatives. It can connect people across generations, but only if there is something to compare it against. A database entry, a family member, a record, a connection. Without that, Jennifer remains difficult to find. Every mystery leaves behind a final question. In the case of Room 2805, there are several. Was Jennifer Fairgate her own architect of disappearance? Was she someone running from her past? Was she protecting someone else? Was she a victim of crime? Or was she simply a woman who, for reasons we may never understand, chose to hide? The truth may be far more ordinary than the theory suggests, or it may be far more complicated. The evidence does not give us certainty, only possibilities. There is something important to remember about Jennifer Fairgate. Over the years, she has become a mystery, a case file, a collection of unanswered questions. But before she was Room 2805, before she was a headline, before she became an unidentified woman, she was a person. She had a childhood, she had memories, she had experiences that shaped her. Somewhere, there may be someone who knows her real name, someone who remembers her voice, someone who knows where she came from, someone who has wondered for years what happened to her. Because the greatest mystery of Room 2805 is not the gun. It's not the missing labels. It's not the false identity. It's not even the question about how she died. The greatest mystery is this: how can a person disappear while still being alive? How can a person die without the world knowing who they are? In 1995, a woman entered Room 2805 at the Oslo Plaza Hotel. She checked in under the name Jennifer Fairgate. Days later, she was found dead. Nearly 3 decades have passed. The room has changed, the hotel has changed, the world has changed. But one question remains: who was the woman who never checked out? The following program is intended for educational, informational, and documentary purposes. This episode is based on publicly available court records, archival reporting, historical sources, and criminological analysis. Some scenes, presentation elements, and narrative sequencing have been reconstructed for clarity and continuity. Every effort has been made to accurately represent events based on the material available at the time of production. Any opinions expressed are for analytical purposes only and do not constitute legal advice or formal allegations. All individuals are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. This program contains discussions of real-world violence and mature subject matter. Listener discretion is advised. You've been listening to Criminology Files. Producing these deep dives takes significant time and research. If you find value in our work, please take a moment to subscribe and leave us a review. For case updates and behind-the-scene content, follow us on Instagram at Criminology Files. We'll see you next week. Good night.